All right, welcome back to another session of Pellet Tech 101. Today we're going to be covering stove bright spray paint. So we're just going to go over some tips and some tricks and best practices using the paint here. We will often use this on stoves, on fireplaces, furnaces, boilers, vent piping. It can be used for any high temperature application. This paint is rated up to 1200 degrees Fahrenheit and generally carry about 15 to 20 colors in the stove bright paint. So again, we're just going to go over supplies needed, general overview of it to give you the best guidance as you start using your stove bright paint. All right, so as we get started here, we want to make sure that we have the right accessories or the right supplies that we need before we get started. So number one, anytime that you're painting, you want to make sure that you're in an area that has really good ventilation. You want to make sure that you have protective material that's around any of the areas where you're actually going to be painting. And we highly recommend like a 3M respirator mask just to prevent breathing in any of the toxins while we are painting. So that would be my first tip. Make sure you're in a very well ventilated area. Make sure that you have a great mask, and make sure that you have plenty of protection around the area where you are going to be painting. And from there, we want to have some materials to be able to prep our surface. So right here, I just have the side panel off a Harman Excentra, and I've just done some basic prep here as we look at the top. But a product like acetone can work really well as we get off some of the old paint or get off some of the old rust that was on there. So acetone can work great. There's obviously lots of different kinds of sandpaper out there. This is a nice Scotch-Brite pad, so I was just using this a little bit just to kind of clean up some of those rust areas and just make sure that, again, the surface is ready. Stove Bright also offers a paint prep as well. So there's a lot of different types of cleaners and preps as we get the surface ready to go before we actually unpaint. And we want to make sure that oils that are on our hands, just different things are cleaned off there. So we have a very nice clean surface that we're working with as we get started here. So still a little bit of rust, and it looks like maybe a pellet bag or something burned to the side. So that would have to be sanded down. But I do have the top of this surface looking pretty good and ready to go here. So next up, I always recommend, even right now, you can see my hands are getting pretty black just from working with the Scotch-Brite pad there. So always can be a good suggestion just to have some protective gloves that we're using here. Always have some extra paper towel handy. Once I start getting into the paint, important to have a nice paper towel right by your side so that we can wipe that tip regularly to make sure that we have good sprays consistently throughout. Now the Stove Bright paint itself, number one, we want to make sure that this is up to proper temperature. So this should be at room temperature before we start using it. By room temperature, I'm usually indicating somewhere around 80 to 90 degrees. So just depending on where this has been stored and where it's at, if this is cold, we are going to have a difficult time having a proper spray out of the can. So what I recommend, if it's cold, fill up a sink full of hot water, let this sit in the hot water for a short period of time. But we want to make sure that we get the paint inside of here up to that room temperature, 70 to 80 degree mark. Once we have it up to room temperature, we want to shake this pretty vigorously for anywhere between 1 to 2 minutes. So I already did a nice shake on it. Obviously lots of different ways that you can shake it. You can pretend that you're a bartender for a short period of time. But shaking the paint and getting everything really well mixed up in there is super important, again, for having nice, even coats as we start spraying with this. So make sure that you give it a minute, minute and a half, 2 minute shake vigorously before you actually start using it. From there, we're going to go ahead and I'm going to put this mask on, and we're going to go ahead and get this prepped. All right, so I've got the respirator mask nice and securely tightened to my face right here. So I'm feeling a nice good seal with that. And about ready to crack this paint open. One of the first things that we want to do is I want to give a couple sprays just right on the cardboard. A lot of times there can be a little bit of gunk that's kind of built up right at the top or in the tip. So we want to clear that out before we first start hitting our surface. And with this one, it was actually pretty clean. So sprayed out right away, really nice. Now, as we start spraying the surface right here, depending if it's bare metal or if we're painting over existing paint, generally you know, I like to do one light coat, and then from there I like to kind of do a medium coat, then a finishing coat. But just depending on what the surface is that you're painting, you can kind of gauge that. I would recommend though at first start, especially if it's a blank metal surface, applying a really nice coat before you go on there heavy. And again, as you see, as I'm spraying right here, I'm going, it's just light, it's light sprays back and forth, and just kind of a nice clean motion as we're moving. And I'm going to say that that looks pretty good as far as the first coat goes. I'm going to go ahead and stop the video and we'll pick it back up for the second coat. All right, we're back here for the second coat. Again, one of the other things that I really like to keep handy on me is just a nice piece of paper towel. And what I like to do is I like to wipe this tip down just like this periodically as I'm painting. Over time, as we go through the can, there will be a little bit of paint residue that builds up right here, and can oftentimes, if we're not paying attention to it, it can give us a little bit of a splatter. So just a really good practice while you're using the paint. Always have a paper towel in your hand, you know, as we go through, you know, 10, 20 sprays, just give that tip a nice little wipe. As you notice here, I'm probably keeping the paint can somewhere around 8 to 12 inches away from the surface. I'm not right on it, and I'm not way back here. So I'm probably maybe 6 to 8 inches or so away from the actual surface that I'm painting. So with 2 coats, it's pretty fragrant, so I'm just going to talk for a second. But with 2 coats on there, it's already looking pretty nice. I'll come back in a second with last notes and tips. All right, we've let the room breathe out a little bit. But yeah, I mean, the fumes that come off this paint when you're using it are extremely fragrant and, in my opinion, extremely toxic. So again, the importance of being in a well-ventilated area and having a great mask that you're wearing while you're doing the painting, I couldn't emphasize and recommend more. So again, we just did the top half of this panel. This is a metallic black, so it kind of has a, you know, nice little metallic shimmer that it throws in. But 2 coats on this turned out to look pretty nice. This paint is actually pretty fast drying, so, you know, really within 5 minutes here, paint's good to go. If I was going to put this panel back on the stove, I could put it back on the stove right away. So pretty slick. Like I said, there's a lot of different colors with this, so you can kind of do some customization should you want to. I've known people that have done like little decals. There's all sorts of stuff that you can do. Your imagination is the limit, so feel free to be creative as you're looking to start your paint project with your stove and your fireplace. I will say that, you know, once we're done using the paint here, it's always good practice. Put the cap back on. Again, store this in an area where there are no chance of any kind of combustibles, that kind of thing. As you go back to reuse the paint again, a couple tips. Obviously, number 1, again, we want to make sure that it's up to proper temperature. Number 2, we want to make sure that it's shaken very vigorously again. And a little tip that I have found works really well. So the actual tip of the paint can, this will pull right out. And if we allow this just to kind of soak in like some of this acetone right here for a short period of time, it'll help clean any of the paint that's actually like in that nozzle area. Sometimes, depending on the length of time, you know, this tip can kind of get gunked up. So acetone works really great to unclog or to clear out that tip so it's ready to go the next time we need to use the paint. So that is the basics, and again, just some general tips and tricks and overview using Stovebright paint. So if you have any questions, If you need any assistance with anything, feel free to leave a comment on the video below. We're always here. We're always happy to help. Thanks so much for joining us again for another session of Pellet Tech 101.